The day my son packed his bags and walked out of my house for the last time, I watched quietly from the porch, feeling the familiar heaviness in my chest settle deeper than usual. Our relationship had been strained for years, pulled apart slowly by influences he never realized were shaping him, people who spoke to him with the kind of polished cruelty that disguises itself as guidance. When he announced he was moving in with his girlfriend's family, a family who rarely hid their discomfort around me, I told him I understood. I told him he deserved to build his life wherever he felt most at peace. But what I didn't expect was that he would leave without looking back, without checking the house one last time, without taking the one creature that loved him unconditionally. His dog Milo. A small, aging terrier with cloudy eyes and a limp from an accident years ago. A dog that had slept at his feet nearly every night of his childhood. I only realized Milo had been left behind when I heard faint scratching at the door 2 hours after they drove away. It wasn't frantic or loud, just a soft, confused sound, as if he couldn't understand why no one was calling his name, why the leash wasn't being grabbed, why the world suddenly felt too quiet. When I opened the door and saw him sitting there, trembling slightly, eyes darting from my face to the empty driveway, something inside me broke in a way I didn't know how to hide. It wasn't just that my son had forgotten him. It was that he had left without checking a single room, without ensuring every living thing he loved was accounted for. It was a kind of neglect born not from carelessness, but from a deeper shift in priorities, one I had sensed but hoped wasn't real. I carried Milo inside and sat with him on the floor. He rested his head on my knee like he had done since the day my son first brought him home as a puppy. I stroked his fur slowly, feeling the uneven patches where age had begun to claim his softness. It was then, holding the little creature my son once begged me to let him keep, that I began to unravel everything that had led us here. For years, the people around my son praised him for distancing himself from the environment I had built. They complimented his ambition while subtly questioning his upbringing. They treated our home as a stepping stone he was lucky to escape. They didn't see me as a mother who worked double shifts so he could attend better schools. They saw me as someone occupying a space they didn't believe I deserved to live in. And slowly, their opinions seeped into his thinking until he began to see my sacrifices as limitations instead of proof of my love. Those same people didn't understand the bond he had with Milo. They didn't understand that the dog was more than a pet. He was a constant reminder of home, of childhood, of the life he was pushing away. Perhaps that was why Milo had been left behind. Perhaps taking him would have meant carrying a piece of me into his new world. A world that wanted him, but not the history that shaped him. As the hours passed, I watched Milo wander from room to room with his slow, uncertain steps, stopping often as if listening for a voice that wasn't coming. When he reached my son's empty bedroom, he hesitated at the doorway, sniffed the air, and then curled up in the exact spot where the bed once stood. His breathing steadied and he closed his eyes, though not in rest, more like resignation. And that was the moment the weight of abandonment settled fully into the house. The silence became louder, harsher. It was a sound only grief could create. I spent the rest of that day tending to Milo, offering him food, water, warmth. He accepted everything politely, but it was clear he was waiting for someone else. As night approached, I realized I needed to confront something I had been avoiding for too long. The truth that my son had not drifted away from me by accident. He had been pulled, reshaped, and molded by people who saw my existence as inconvenient. They never insulted me directly. Their prejudice was quieter, woven into their smiles and their questions, into the way they praised him for his potential while subtly implying he had come from less. Those influences had taught him to carry shame he didn't earn. But Milo knew nothing of these things. He understood loyalty in its purest form. His entire world had always been built around the boy who raised him. And suddenly that world had been taken away. I decided then that I would not let him suffer in confusion. I may have lost parts of my child to the world outside, but I would not lose this creature who had done nothing wrong. As the night deepened, a storm rolled across the sky, shaking the windows and sending cold drafts through the house. Milo, frightened by the thunder, limped toward my room and nudged the door with his nose. I lifted him onto the bed gently, and he curled against me, trembling less with each passing minute. I knew he felt the absence, but he also felt the presence that remained, mine, steady and familiar. The next morning, I received a message from my son. Not a call. Just a brief, careless text saying they accidentally forgot Milo and would try to come by sometime later in the week. The words were hollow, empty of urgency or guilt. It was the kind of message someone sends when they know they should care, but simply don't. And in that moment, I understood something clearly. My son wasn't the same person who grew up in this house. He had changed in ways that went deeper than choices or maturity. He had changed in ways that reflected what he felt he needed to be to fit among people who still saw him as different. Hours turned into days. The promised visit never came. Milo grew comfortable with me once more, finding solace in the routines he once shared with my son. I took him on slow walks, guided him up and down the stairs, brushed his fur the way my son used to when he was younger. And with each passing day, I felt the fragile thread connecting my son to this home stretch thinner. But everything shifted the evening Milo didn't greet me at the door. I found him lying beside the hallway window, breathing shallowly, his eyes half closed but searching. I knelt beside him, brushing my hand over his head, whispering assurances he couldn't understand but seemed to feel. Milo's small chest rose and fell with effort, and I realized this was not confusion or abandonment now. This was the end of a long, loyal life reaching its final chapter. I stayed with him for hours, never leaving his side. When his breathing finally stopped, it felt as though the house exhaled with him, releasing a grief that had been building since the moment my son walked away. Milo passed quietly without fear, with his head resting against my hand. The same way he had sought comfort from me the day he was left behind. I held him long after, unable to move, unable to accept that the last piece of my son's innocence had slipped away forever. When I finally told my son what happened, his response was brief, almost mechanical. A single sentence acknowledging the loss, followed by an excuse about being busy. That was when the truth settled deep into my heart. He had not only left behind a dog, he had left behind everything that had ever loved him without question. I buried Milo beneath the oak tree in our yard, the tree that had shaded countless summer days when my son was still young and unashamed to be loved by me. As I placed the final scoop of soil over the small mound, I realized this wasn't just a burial. It was a quiet farewell to the years when my son and I were still connected, still whole. And though it broke me to admit it, sometimes the end of one bond becomes the beginning of another truth. Some heartbreaks don't tear you apart in one moment. Some break slowly, quietly, through a series of small abandonments. But in the silence that follows, a single question rises like a whisper. If love isn't enough to keep someone close, then what is?